Hello, I'm Ciarán Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. Now in this week's episode we discuss late pregnancy nutrition with Dr Tim Keady. We start off with him explaining the increase in fetal growth that occurs in the final weeks of gestation and the impact that this has on both the ewe's energy demand and our intake potential. We discuss concentrate price and why it's essential to examine ration composition when purchasing, and Tim expands on this point, giving his pick of energy, fibre and protein sources that he would include in a ration. We move on to discuss the impact of protein source on performance, and Tim discusses the results of a trial comparing soybean meal to the alternative protein sources. We finish up discussing targeted feed rates and what influences this. We start off, however, with Tim discussing the impact on nutrition in the weeks before lambing has on subsequent performance.
It's a very important time on sheep farms because on most sheep farms now it's kind of the tranquility is prevailing before the storm. And by tranquility, I mean that in many farms, sheep are housed, they're in late pregnancy. Pregnancy is developing. Colostrum should be being prepared for production within the udder. There's not a lot of labour on farms except preparing for the lambing. But once lambing starts, you're going into the storm. What you do during these next few weeks, in terms of nutrition-wise, will have a major impact on lamb birth weight. It will also affect whether the pregnancy is successful or not. It'll affect quality of colostrum and quantity. It'll affect ease of lambing, lamb survival, lamb weight at birth, and formation of the ewe-lamb bond. If you get nutrition right, all of these things will be improved, which will have a consequent reduction in labour. If you get them wrong, you could run into issues such as low lamb birth weight, issues such as higher lamb mortality, but more importantly, a lot of labour required trying to get milk or colostrum into lambs because their dams or their mothers don't have enough colostrum. At the moment, what happens in late pregnancy is that the weight of the fetus is increased dramatically. So, for example, during the last 6 weeks of pregnancy, the weight of fetuses increased by about 70%. During the last 4 weeks, it increases by about 50%. And during the last 2 weeks, it increases by about 20%. So at the point of lambing, the lambs account for approximately 60% of the weight of the uterine contents. So consequently, if a ewe is producing twin lambs, each weighing, for example, 5 kilos, that ewe will lose approximately 17 kilos live weight at the point of lambing.
Yeah, well, often we don't factor in there as the fluids as well, that ewe is under a lot of pressure in terms of physically what she's carrying.
That's correct, yes.
Tim, just to put a little bit of this in context, and some of what we've covered before, but that fetus increase, the fact that she's producing colostrum, the fact that you herself is probably under a little bit more pressure too, from an energy balance point of view, how much of a change are we looking at? Relative, we'll say, look at the ewes before scanning. How much of an increase are we looking at in her demand for energy?
Okay, in late pregnancy, Ciarán, due to the rapidly growing fetuses and other development, the metabolizable energy requirements of ewes carrying singles, twins, and triplets increased by 40%, 60%, and 70% respectively during the final 6 weeks of pregnancy. So if we take an example, the ME requirement of a twin-bearing ewe weighing approximately 75 kilos will increase from 12 up to 19 megajoules per day. And if you take this into context, that a kilogram of barley at 14% moisture contains 11.4 megajoules of ME. So that means that during the final 6 weeks of pregnancy, there's an increase in the ME requirement of twin-bearing ewes by about 16%, or 7 megajoules of ME requirement per head per day.
Okay, so sizable increase, and that corresponds with what we've always said about increasing ration content in late pregnancy. And we'll come to some of that in a moment. Just in terms of intake, Tim, at what point does it start becoming limited in those ewes, as in forage intake?
Well, see, the intake of forage and how it progresses during late pregnancy actually depends on the feed value of the forage. We've studies which have shown that during late pregnancy, that if you're feeding medium feed value silage, that even when you're increasing concentrate feed level, you have little impact on silage intake because it has a low substitution effect. In other words, that the silage alone wouldn't have met the energy requirements. However, if you have high feed value grass silage, such as 75% plus DMD, as you increase concentrate, you have a bigger negative effect on silage intake because of its concentrate sparing effect. And some of our studies have shown that with high feed value silage, for each 1 kilogram of concentrate you feed, you'll displace 0.75 kilos of grass silage dry matter within the diet. So basically, with high feed value silages, feeding too much concentrate is just displacing silage in the diet.
So just in terms of total intake then?
Yeah, if you're talking about total dry matter intake, you're including both the silage and the concentrate. With high feed value grass silage, as you increase concentrate, total dry matter intake will not decline, whereas silage intake will decline because this concentrate is replacing silage in the diet. If you're talking about medium feed value grass silage, as you increase concentrate feed level coming towards lambing, you actually increase total dry matter intake because the intake of the silage on its own was not very high to start off with, and you're getting a lower concentrate substitution effect.
So I suppose we can't lose sight of the fact that what we're trying to aim towards is our target birth rates. It's going to look. We know it's going to have a positive impact on subsequent lamb growth rate. We've covered that previously with you. It's going to have a big impact though on lamb survival. And getting that right in this next couple of weeks, like you've touched that opening importance of that, but that really is setting you up for the year.
Yes, our studies at Athenry would have shown that optimum birth weight for lambs born as singles is approximately 6 kilos. For lambs born as twins is approximately 5.5 kilos, and for lambs born as triplets is approximately 4.5 kilos. And when I'm talking about optimum, I'm talking about where the weight at which the lowest level of lamb mortality occurred or the highest level of lamb survivability occurred, whichever way you want to look at it. We've previous studies shown that lamb birth weight has a big effect also on lamb performance, and our data would show that each 1 kilo increase in lamb birth weight will increase the weight at weaning by approximately 3.2 kilos, and thus having a big effect by reducing the age of slaughter by 2 to 3 weeks.
You've covered the increase in energy content. We've just touched there on why you were trying to achieve it. Let's talk a little bit about rations and the importance of a quality ration. I suppose maybe just to say at the start first, like cost of rations this year has gone up significantly relative to maybe 2 years ago. Let's put that a little bit in context. It's a significant investment. If you scale that back a lot, though, there is a negative consequence. So it's probably the one time a year where you have to invest in it. The silage quality is already there. Hopefully you know what it is. Talk to me a little bit about ration price and justifying that cost.
Ciarán, you're quite correct. Concentrate price has increased. If we look at in the last 2 years, the price of concentrate has increased by 150 to 170 euros per tonne, which is a quite substantial increase. And you're also quite correct that it's not a time to start cutting back on the price of ingredients, trying to reduce your costs. It's the one time of the year I would still feed a level of concentrate to meet the requirements of the ewes, because you're talking about having an impact on lamb birth weight, you're talking about having an impact on lamb survivability, you're talking about having an impact on colostrum quality and quantity. And if you get these factors right, these factors are the key factors that affect the amount of labour that's required per ewe when she's lambing in the lambing shed. And the last thing you want to do at this time of the year, which is the busiest time of the year on any sheep farm, is to increase the amount of labour required. You want to reduce it. When we talk about the price of concentrate, we can talk about monetary value, which 170 to 180 euros per tonne increase in the last 2 years. But I think when you're buying a concentrate, you don't look at just the monetary value per se. You look at the ingredients, because at the end of the day, if you put in good ingredients, you will have a positive effect on lamb on ewe and lamb performance. Whereas you can also reduce concentrate price by maybe 20 to 30 euros per tonne, and when you work it out per ewe basis, you're only talking about maybe 20 or maybe 30 or 40 cents per ewe in your flock, and it's minimal when you talk about per ewe basis rather than per tonne basis.
I think that's a very important point. That headline figure of the price per tonne, it's not telling you the full story.
No, the price per tonne is not telling you the full story. And for example, if you look at some rations will quote an energy content, a protein content, a fibre content, and an oil content. And if you want to be sarcastic about it, you could formulate something to meet them values by using oil, by using sawdust for the fibre content, urea for the protein content, and ash and soil for the ash content. So you will meet what is stated on the label, but at the end of the day, it's not what's stated on the label the approximate analysis that counts. What counts is the composition or the ingredient composition. And when we're formulating rations, we have a number of, we want to use good energy sources, we want to use good protein sources, and we also want to use good fibre sources. This year, because of the what's cost effective at the moment, we'll say from a fibre source is soya hulls or else sugar beet pulp, and both of them are good fibre sources. From an energy point of view, your optimum will be maize, followed by barley, and possibly a small bit of wheat. And when you're talking about using good protein sources, the ideal protein source is soybean, followed by rapeseed, and also you can use some distillers. And if you're using distillers for sheep, it's important to use maize distillers and not wheat distillers because of the possibility of copper toxicity, depending on the level of inclusion within the diet.
Tim, just to come back in with you there, so your protein, like we didn't talk about the protein yet. That's another vital element of the story, especially in terms of colostrum quality, but also in terms of the effect that can have on lamb birth rate. Put that a little bit in context for me, and you might just explain then what our target should be in a ration and what our sources should be.
Okay, when we're formulating rations at the moment, Ciarán, for sheep farms, for ewes in late pregnancy, we're targeting a 19% crude protein ration, simply because a lot of the grass silages or hays that are being fed on sheep farms to ewes during late pregnancy have a low crude protein concentration. And you know that the two factors that affect the crude protein concentration of any forage is how leafy it is when it's being ensiled. So a lot of silage will have DMD less than 70, so that means there's a certain amount of stem in them. And the second key factor that affects the level of protein within the grass silage or grass hay is the amount of nitrogen fertilizer that has been applied. And we all know that the amount of nitrogen fertilizer being applied is lower on sheep farms relative to other enterprises such as dairying, and particularly with the year that's just gone by, I would say the levels of nitrogen has been reduced further. So just to be sure that there's enough of nitrogen going into the ewe in late pregnancy when it's required both for colostrum production and increase in lamb birth weight, we would recommend to formulate a diet concentrate with 19% crude protein. When we're formulating a ration, from a protein point of view, we've undertaken the studies at Athenry where we looked at formulating rations that differed in the source of protein. So I'll give you an example. We undertook a study a number of years ago where we looked at rations that were formulated where protein came predominantly from soybean, and we compared them to rations where the protein came predominantly from rapeseed, maize distillers, and maize gluten. These rations were formulated of the same crude protein and the same metabolizable energy. So from approximate analysis point of view, they were the same. When we fed them to the ewes, we found that the concentrate that was formulated using the soybean as a protein source produced lambs that were 0.3 kilos heavier at birth. These lambs were 0.9 of a kilo heavier at weaning. And we found that the additional level in animal performance, that if you were to feed extra concentrates as creep feed, that this was equivalent to offering each lamb 6 kilos of creep concentrate from the point of birth to the point of weaning, which would be an additional cost of €6 per ewe that would be rearing a set of twins. The heavier weight of weaning of about 0.9 of a kilo resulted in these lambs being slaughtered approximately 1 week earlier.
That difference you've seen, and look, as I say, it's a positive one in the right direction. What is the difference in those protein sources? Why did you get that impact from the soya?
Okay, just before I answer your question, Ciarán, we also noted that we had 2 levels of concentrate feeding in that study, and that ewes that were offered 16 kilos of the soya-based ration produced lambs with the same weight at birth as weaning as ewes that had been offered 28 kilos of the concentrate that was formulated using rapeseed, maize distillers, and maize gluten. So to answer your question, why are we getting the response? And the response is that the soybean-based concentrate had a higher quantity of digestible, undegradable protein concentration, which is the proportion of the dietary protein that escapes fermentation in the rumen and is subsequently absorbed in the small intestine. The idea, preferably as much protein that can bypass the rumen and is absorbed within the small intestine, you get better utilization from it. If you take an example of sheep that are on a silage-based diet, silage is a fermented product, and a lot of the protein, I'd say about 70 to 80% of it, when it's in a silage, is available in a rapidly digestible fractions. So they call it rapidly soluble fractions, called the A fraction. That means that about 70 to 80% of the protein in the silage is digested in the rumen. And if the bugs aren't able to capture it within the rumen, it passes through the animal in urine, and it passes out through the urine and is of little benefit. However, protein that can bypass the rumen and is absorbed and digested within the small intestine results in a better utilization of the protein. And that's what we believe is the reason that the soybean-based ration, because of its increase in digestible undegradable protein, or DUP, resulted in the heavier lamb birth weight. And this was due to a combination of weight at birth and probably due to a higher milk supply post-lambing up till the point of weaning.
Just in terms of ration formulation, Tim, and look, you mentioned the rapeseed as a good source for distillers, as a possible source for too. Does the soya have to be the sole source of that protein? I know we're getting some from the cereals as well, but would you go for the sole source, or what level does it need to be at in a ration?
No, it doesn't have to be at the sole source, Ciarán. And if we were to make rations this year with soybean as a sole source, they would be pretty expensive, because off the top of my head, I think soybean is up around €650 per tonne. Can I answer your question by giving you an example of the concentrate that we formulated for feeding at Athenry this year? And in that ration, 17.5% of the ration is soybean, 28% is maize, 18% is soya hulls, 10% is barley, 10% is coming from rapeseed, because that is also a relatively good protein source. 6.5% is maize distillers, 4.5% is sugar beet pulp, and then the rest is made up of molasses and minerals and vitamins.
Okay. Just I'll throw another one to you. If you're not able to get access to a quality ration, some will go with the option of topping up. Preference, Tim, of topping up with soya in late pregnancy versus maybe going looking for a ration day one, and if a ration that includes it isn't available, is topping up an option? And if so, by how much?
You mean by topping up with soybean?
Yes.
Everything is an option, but for me, Ciarán, on day one, you buy a ration that you know that has got a good level of soybean. You start feeding it from whatever 6 or 7 weeks out from lambing. I wouldn't be buying a low protein concentrate for feeding during the first 2 or 3 weeks, even though you're stepping it up. And the reason I say that is most silages, as I said earlier on, is low in protein. Most silages are average at best feed value in terms of DMD and ME concentration. Also, because when you start feeding at 6 to 7 weeks prior to lambing, you're feeding low levels, maybe 200 or 300 grams per day. The cost benefit for most flocks in Ireland, which have about 100 ewes on average, of buying a low protein concentrate versus a high protein concentrate would only give you a saving of about €30 per tonne, which is equivalent to only about 45 cents per ewe. It's not worthwhile. Feeding more protein during that period of time, that's between 6 and 3 weeks prior to lambing, can and does have a positive effect on total food intake, and can and does have a positive effect actually on silage intake, because the first increment of protein increases silage intake. My preference, and I've no doubt about this, but my preference when you're feeding ration to ewes in late pregnancy is to have the soybean included normally, and the reason why it's well mixed within the ration and that the ewes are eating it in every mouthful that they consume. However, if people are going to spread 100 grams of concentrate, 100 grams of soybean, it's an extra chore to do. If you're feeding it in troughs and feeding the pellets, often the soybean drops down to the bottom, and some ewes don't eat it and some do. Whereas if it's included in the pellet, you can be sure that in every mouthful the soybean is concluded. If you have a good ration from day one, there's no need for using a top up of soybean, particularly at the price it is now. It should be included in the ration, and that's it. So
for just to synopsize that, keep it simple, spend the time getting a good ration day one, put the right ingredients in it, and feed that from day one right the way through.
I totally agree with you. And also, if you're talking about soybean, and I'm not too sure, I haven't seen the prices for the last 2 weeks, but if you're buying bags of soybean, you're probably paying an extra €50 per tonne relative to buying it in bulk. No. And that extra price this year stands for all of ration. It seems to be that the price coming from millers, whether you buy it in bulk or buy it in 25 kilo bags, seem to be varying from about 35 up to €50 per tonne, depending on your source depending on the miller that you're buying your ration from.
Another important thing to consider. Maybe one final thing to finish up on. We've gone through the demands, we've gone through the energy, we've gone through the protein story. What we need to talk about there at the very tail end of this is how much. So obviously there's going to be a number of factors having an influence on that silage quality, probably been the biggest one, but relatively speaking, Tim, total level of concentrate, upper feed level of concentrate as well, where is that at?
Well, Ciarán, the two factors that affect the amount of concentrate requirement for ewes in late pregnancy is where they're being offered a silage-based diet is chop length and silage DMD. These are the two factors that affect intake characteristics. So if we take an example where you've got super silage 78, 79 DMD for twin bearing ewes, I would supplement them with a total of about 8 to 10 kilos of concentrate during late pregnancy. If it's 72% DMD, a twin bearing ewe needs 17 to 18 kilos of concentrate. And if it's poor quality silage, 64 DMD, they need about 25 kilos of concentrate. That's precision chopped. If you take big bale silage, high DMD silage needs about 12 kilos of concentrate. A 72 DMD big bale silage needs about 25 kilos of concentrate per ewe in late pregnancy, and a 64 DMD silage needs approximately 35 kilos of concentrate. In other words, chop length will increase the amount of concentrate required with poor DMD silages by about 10 kilos per ewe during late pregnancy. The figures I'm after quoting are for twin bearing ewes. If you have a single bearing ewe, you can drop these figures by about 7 to 8 kilos of concentrate per ewe. And if you've got triplet bearing ewes, I'd increase these figures by about 7 to 8 kilos of concentrate per ewe for the extra lamb. It's important when you're talking about feeding ewes in late pregnancy that you feed them to meet requirements, because as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, that the increase in lamb birth weight increases dramatically towards late pregnancy, and if you increase the level of concentrate each week coming towards pregnancy, you're feeding the ewe to meet her requirements. So, for example, if I may say so, if your objective was to feed 20 kilos of concentrate per ewe during the last 6 weeks of pregnancy, an example of a feed schedule would be 6 weeks out from lambing, I give her 0.3 of a kilo. 5 weeks out from lambing, I'd also give her 0.3 of a kilo. 4 weeks out from lambing, I give her 0.4 of a kilo per ewe per day. 3 weeks out from lambing, 0.5 of a kilo per ewe per day. 2 weeks out from lambing, 0.6 of a kilo per ewe per day. And the week prior to lambing, I give her 0.8 of a kilo per ewe per day if your objective is to get 20 kilos of concentrate into your ewes pre-lambing.
Tim, look, it's been good having you on. It's an important topic. It's certainly something we need to focus on for the coming weeks.
Thanks, Ciarán.
We'll leave it there for this week's episode. As Tim has highlighted, nutrition in the coming weeks has a massive impact on subsequent performance. So it's important we pay attention to the ration we're feeding and we feed at appropriate rates. That's it for me for this episode. Again, for updates on my sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Ciarán Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and tune in to future episodes.